This video is about some experimental brewing techniques that I've used with some success, starting out with a light roasted barley and some dark roasted barley, 11 pounds total. First step is to crack the grains. Then I just pour through a filter. I'm not actually trying to filter, I'm using this as a tea bag technique. So basically the grain is going to be used inside of that mesh filter as though it is a tea bag. Then I filled this up until it was at the 5-gallon mark. I have a modulator control for bringing it to the specific temperature of the mash. I use 66 degrees Celsius. The controller prevents it from going any higher than that. Now it's time to process some apples. I'm using 10 pounds of apples in this particular recipe. I came up with this recipe 5 or so years ago, and I used Red Delicious apples for it then. I was going to just buy some cider, but they didn't have any cider that lacked preservatives at the grocery store, so I just used my juicer. The mash looks good, temperature-wise. After letting the enzymatic reaction take place, I take my tea bag of grain and I move it back and forth between two pots. Then I pour the hot water from the mash on top of the tea bag of grain. I do this back and forth 3 to 4 times. I find this yields a good amount of sugar, which I usually just do a taste test to find out. Finally, I do one last pour through a filter just to get out some of the sediment. And here I drop in my 10 pounds of juiced apples, again using a filter. Unfortunately, it's nighttime here, so it's not going to be the greatest filming. Here's the recipe I created, with a few modifications. I'll actually post this in the description. And my trusty scale for measuring hops. I'm also dropping in 1 pound of malt extract and 16 ounces of honey. The honey takes some time. You have to pour it and then try to remove all of the residue from the container. Finally, I'm adding some bittering hops. I do a 60-minute boil with 2 types of hops in this case. Now it's time to sterilize all of the equipment. Here is a little video of the controller moderating temperature. And finally dropping in the finishing hops for 15 minutes of boil. This is my setup for cooling down the wort after it's been boiled long enough. I'm just using some copper tubing and hooking it into the garden hose. Finally, I'm doing one last filtering with a pre-sterilized filter, and that's just to get any residual sediment and hop pellet out. Using some Munton yeast. Here's where it gets interesting. I'm using some very bottom shelf vodka and adding it into the wort. And the reason for doing that is because the ethanol in it will break the surface tension, preventing foaming. Believe it or not, it works really well. You can see here that this one is bubbling tremendously, probably the most bubbling I've ever seen, and there has been no foam over. So the experimental aspects of my brewing method involve modulating temperature for the mash rather than using a cooler. A lot of people use an insulated cooler for that, but it's too much equipment for me to deal with, so I simply work around the issue by controlling the temperature. The next thing I do that a lot of people would say is incorrect is to do my boil with the lid on. I just don't really like wasted energy, and I haven't noticed any off flavors from doing it this way. Some people say you have to boil off all the volatile compounds or it will affect the flavor of the beer. And lastly, adding that vodka. I had looked far and wide for any examples of adding ethanol directly to the wort, and I haven't seen anybody doing it. I did find one scientific white paper, but I couldn't read the whole thing without paying. So I figured I would just give it a try. Apparently, one of the reasons it is not used is because you can't add distilled spirits inside of beer. They require different licenses. However, since this is just homebrew, it really doesn't matter. And I find it to be very effective in reducing the foaming. So next time you have some foam over, just give it a shot of vodka. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. I'm releasing one new video every week. Thanks for watching.